March 22nd, 1913, Shanghai, the Republic of China. Song Xiaoren, the Premier of China, second only to President Yuan Shikai, entered the train station. He was just elected Premier, but for some reason, Yuan Shikai refused to return to Nanjing, forcing the National Assembly and the government to move north. Song is traveling with his colleagues from the Kuomintang Party, but as he waits to board the train, two shots ring out and Song falls to the floor. He died 2 days later in the Shanghai General Hospital. This sends outrage throughout China, with the Kuomintang and Sun Yat-sen blaming Yuan Shikai. Yan refuses, but as investigators dig, they find evidence linking the murder to the most powerful man in China, the soon-to-be emperor. In the last episode, we talked about the Xinhai Revolution and the democracy that followed. However, that's not entirely where the story ends. As Yuan Shikai was not satisfied with the president, he wanted more, and we will talk about the rise and fall of the Empire of China, and the beginning of the Warlord era. As mentioned, Song Xiaoren was assassinated in March 1913, just before becoming premier. In response, Yan sacked his cabinet with loyalists and appointed a pro-monarchist premier. Then, he took out loans from the West to pay for his extravagant lifestyle. Without the consent of Parliament, may I add. Yan refused any accusations that Song's death was the work of someone hired by him. Yan then recognized the independence of Mongolia, and the Kuomintang accused him of betraying his country. In response, the Progressive Party accused them of plotting a revolution. Yan even issued new money with his name, money that is still in use today. And Sun saw the writing on the wall. Yan was getting too authoritarian. Sun raised an army in opposition to Yan, and a second revolution began just over a year after the last one. Yan began to dismiss KMT governors and put people in charge that he liked. On July 11th, Li Yinjun declared the independence of Jiangxi province. Jiangsu, Shanghai, Anhui, Guangdong, Fanzhou, Henan, and Sichuan also declared their loyalty to Sun Yat-sen. The rebels lost the first battle in Xuzhou on July 22nd. The Beiyang 2nd Division then forced them to flee to Nanjing. Sun also fled to Shanghai, where Kuomintang forces lay. In just 2 years, Sun went from being a regular citizen to being a revolutionary, then president, then back to revolutionary. And his lifelong dream that he had worked for lasted just over a year. On July 31st, a Beiyang force surrounded Fengtai and captured it the next day. On August 4th, Yan asked the governor of Yunnan to move his forces to Chongqing. However, they were held back midway. On August 6th, Anhui capitulated. On August 11th, Nanjing was taken by Beiyang forces. However, the revolutionaries came in behind and surrounded them in the city. The next day, Henan rescinded their declaration of independence. On August 18th, Beiyang forces entered Hefei, taking the city of Wuhu. The next day, on the 18th, forces entered Shanghai, but Sun and most of the KMT leadership avoided arrest. On September 11th, Zhang Qiwu abandoned Chongqing, dispersed his forces, assumed an alias, and fled. The next day, the Second Revolution was over for good. It was a total failure for the revolutionaries. Sun packed up and fled to Japan along with high-ranking Kuomintang members that had survived. He had gone right back to square one. In January 1914, Yan dissolved parliament and gave the governorship of China's provinces to his friends in the military. He also gave those governors control of their own armies. I'm sure this won't lead to another revolution or some unforeseen problems. To give his government a semblance of legitimacy, Yan convened a body of 66 men from his cabinet who, on May 1st, proclaimed a constitutional cabinet that effectively replaced China's provisional constitution. The new legal status quo gave Yuan, as president, practically unlimited powers over China's military, finances, foreign policy, and the rights of China's citizens. Yan justified this by declaring democracy a failed experiment. After threats and bribes, he was elected by parliament to a 5-year term. Yan said the Chinese people were used to autocratic rule and that he should be emperor. Then he made a pro-monarchy puppet group that began to beg him to take the throne, but he refused every time. This was all a stunt. At the same time, Japan, who was trying to gain more power over China, Japan, eyeing out China, gave the Chinese 21 demands, which would greatly expand Japanese control of China. Japan would keep the German colonies it took, would gain control of the railways, and, the most outrageous one, would give Japan a decisive voice in finance, policing, and government affairs. The last part would in fact make China a protectorate of Japan. This thereby reduce Western influence. The Chinese public responded with outcry and boycotted Japanese goods. After China rejected Japan's proposal, the Japanese Prime Minister deleted Group 5, which was control over policing and government affairs, and Yan, not in a position to go to war with Japan, decided to accept. In 1915, a special national convention of nearly 2,000 delegates unanimously endorsed Yan for emperor. This was all rigged in Yan's favor. Yan reluctantly accepted and was crowned Emperor of China on December 12, 1915, founding the Chinese Empire, with him being called the Great Emperor of the Chinese Empire. The new nation received no recognition, and not many citizens actually supported them. Now, remember Puyi and the Qing imperial family? Well, they had been living in the Forbidden City ever since the end of the Qing in 1912. After the war, they were allowed to maintain their way of life. With this, they actually supported Yuan and proposed a royal marriage between Yuan's daughter and Puyi. If you've seen the movie Last Emperor, you might remember that when Puyi is growing up living in the Forbidden City, he actually isn't the emperor anymore. This is around the time all this is going on. Yan still did not have the support of the military, however, and, as you'll see later, whoever has the support of the military calls the shots in China. 3 days after the empire was declared, multiple provinces declared him a traitor and formed the National Protection Army. Only a year after the last revolution, there was once again another one called the National Protection War, but this time, things were looking significantly worse for Yan. But just as military action was being undertaken, nations around the world began to recognize the new empire. The National Protection Army made for Beijing, but they had a long way to go. On January 1st, they met Yan's forces for the first battle of the war, but they were almost completely wiped out, and by January 20th, Yan's forces were on the run and the National Protection Army was moving for Beijing. By the 20th as well, Guangdong, Shandong, Hunan, Shanxi, Guangxi, and Jiangsu followed suit and declared their independence shortly after. Seeing this, foreign powers withdrew their support, and Japan threatened to invade, but then changed their minds and committed to overthrowing Yan, recognizing both sides were in a war and encouraging their citizens to fight for the National Protection Army. On March 17th, facing pressure from, well, everyone, Yan convened what little supporters he had and asked what he should do, and on March 22nd, he abdicated. The Empire of China had lasted 84 days, but that ended up being the most successful attempt at restoring the Chinese monarchy, but not the only one, as we'll see. On June 6th, the terminally ill and with no power, Yan died disgraced. Yan was perhaps one of the most influential figures in modern Chinese history. If he hadn't become authoritarian and if he hadn't taken control, then it's likely things that the warlord era, civil war, and many more things wouldn't have happened, and China would have been a lot more stable. However, there's no way of really knowing, although I guess some blame can be shifted to Sun Yat-sen for giving Yan the role for free in the first place. But still, Yan was indeed a very influential member, for good or for bad. And he will set the catalyst for a lot of things we will talk about for this series. With Yuan gone, Sun returned to China and re-established the Kuomintang. Li Yanhong succeeded Yan as prime minister due to his fiercely anti-monarchist stance, and the original parliament that was decided after the 1913 elections reconvened in Beijing. Democracy in China had been restored, but for how long, no one knew. The first issue was for them to establish a national army, but for reasons I will explain later, this never happened. The largest issue was World War I. Most in Parliament agreed to take German possessions in China. However, it was exposed that President Yan Hong had been taking loans from the Germans to stay out of the war. This scandal would destroy the legitimacy of the central government, and Dan Kuri, the premier of China, advocated for fresh elections and a dissolution of the parliament. But another issue plagued the nation. You see, many of the army generals who had fought against Yan were sick of the instability and the constant revolutions every year, and they thought that the provinces they had taken during the National Protection War looked pretty good under their hands, and were unwilling to give control back. Suddenly, the country descended into various factions of warlords trying to take control of the country, with the main Republic of China government being called the Beiyang government. Sun Yat-sen and co. went south to Guangxi and raised a small army themselves to try to take back the country in their name. Meanwhile, in Beijing, with control over most of the provinces gone, and the new basically dictator of the military government, asked a warlord by the name of Zhang Jun to mediate the discussion on whether to go to war. At this point, China was in a civil war between around 15 competing warlords trying to take control of the country, with law being dependent on where you lived and at what time. However, Zhang Jun was one of the few military commanders still loyal to the Beiyang government. Zhang arrived in Beijing, but when he did something that shocked the nation. He reinstated the 11-year-old Emperor Puyi. The Qing dynasty was back. Thanks for watching this episode of the Chinese Revolution, and be sure to stay tuned for the next episode. In the next episode, we will talk about China's contributions to World War I, as well as the instability, failed Manchu restoration, and Sun Yat-sen's attempts to get back in control of China. We will go until about 1928, and till Sun Yat-sen's unfortunate death, but to the rise of two very prominent people that we will follow until the end of the series. So, stay tuned.